Hello, welcome to Biblio Bistro.
We're here at the Portage Lake District Library, and we're excited to show you how to whip up some fresh, seasonal, simple, and delicious food.
I'm Michael, and I'm the program coordinator at PLDL.
And I'm Megan. I'm a registered dietitian and community health educator with the Portage Health Foundation.
Hey Megan, what are we doing this evening?
Hi Michael. We actually have a guest coming with us today. Her name is Ashley with North Harvest Farm, which is located in Calumet, and she's going to show us how to make sauerkraut.
Ooh.
Yeah, so we'll make some space for our friend Ashley to come over.
Hey Ashley.
Hi.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me out.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, Ashley's farm is out in Calumet, and she's at several other markets as well. You go to the Calumet market, correct?
Yeah, we do the Calumet market, the Hancock market. My dad goes to that one for us. That's 3 to 6 on Thursdays. And then we have a farm stand at our place on Tuesdays from 3 to 6, but that's finished for the season.
Okay.
And then you also do a CSA.
Yes, we do a CSA, and then sell to the co-op, a few restaurants. We started with the schools recently and a few other places, which is really, really wonderful to have so many places for the produce to go,
Yeah.
to be honest.
Well, if you don't mind, we can kind of walk through step by step if someone wanted to make kraut or sauerkraut, what that would look like.
So there are a few different ways to start. There's the just going with a quart jar and real small, using a knife. A little bit bigger, you could use a mandolin. But what Jake and I do, and it's kind of become something I do with my folks, is using actually this.
Oh.
This is a kraut shredder, and I think it's something my dad had. So we actually prop this on a 5-gallon bucket against the wall, and then you can take a whole head of cabbage and use it. It's like a giant mandolin.
Oh, wow.
So that's really nice to have.
Yeah.
Really heavy.
That's how I was going to say that.
I want to do it that way. Can we do it that way today?
That would be like a big, if you want to do 5 gallons at a time and you have a big crock. So that gets shredded into a bucket with the salt, and that's where we use this big pounder. So instead of going by hand in a small bowl, you take that pounder, and that's where it's kind of, you can have almost like an event, so to speak. Someone's shredding it, someone's pounding it, someone's getting the salt weighed out, maybe, have some drinks, kind of have dinner around like this sort of, I don't know, it's kind of fun to do as a group. And then, so that's on a big scale, but we're just going to go on a small scale. So usually for this, I just use actually a knife and a bowl to start.
How do you want me to cut the cabbage?
Actually, let's pull one leaf off whole, and we'll
Okay.
use that to sort of cover it when we're done.
Alrighty. Ooh, well.
Well, as best as one can.
I'm already failing at this.
No, and that's another thing. There's, I'm no expert, and just getting started with something like kraut or carrots and garlic, something real simple, is just a great way to start. And you can just go from there, getting more books, looking at more different sources online to get more and more sort of advanced, or you can just keep it really basic, which is
I want to try again.
no problem at all.
I have a little, oh look, it's a little bit better, this one. Okay, so how do you want the cabbage done up? Like in half, or
Usually
how do
what
you like
I'll
to
do
start?
is I'll cut the cabbage in half and then sort of take the core out.
Sure.
And actually the core is really good with a little salt sprinkle on it just to snack on. That's something my dad would do for us when we were young.
Megan, would you like to snack on the cabbage core?
I would love to, Michael. Maybe not right this
Off
moment.
camera, perhaps?
Yes, sure.
Okay, we're just going to do a half?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
great. And then you can cut that in half.
Yeah, it's a quarter, yeah?
And then it's also up to you. Like, I don't like to shred it too fine, but basically the thicker the shreds, probably the longer it might take to ferment.
Quarter,
So,
half inch?
Probably closer, like, yeah, maybe like that.
Okay, I'm there. Ooh, I'm going to work for this one, hey?
And then cabbage really can just be your base, so it's just salt and cabbage, but you can add garlic, you can add herbs, carrots, ginger, turmeric, all kinds of different things to make different types of krauts. But we're just going to keep it simple today.
Yeah, we are.
So is there a certain amount of salt that you need to shoot for each time?
Yeah, that can depend on what the vegetable is, but generally, and actually I use a app on my phone that's a salt calculator, and it gives you a guide for like many different vegetables and what the ideal ratio, like percentage for the brine is.
Okay.
But for cabbage, you're shooting for like about a 2% ratio, and that is about I think it was a teaspoon, it's in the recipe, a teaspoon and a half to 2 teaspoons per pound of cabbage. So it's also a good idea to weigh your cabbage first.
Okay.
Then you know how much salt to use. So for a big batch,
I'm going to weigh the
like-
cabbage. Okay.
How does that feel?
I'm going to say 1.25 pounds.
I think that, yeah, so then we'll use about a tablespoon. So to do a quart jar, which is what we're shooting for, it's about 3.5 pounds-ish of cabbage and about, I believe it was 2 tablespoons of salt. So what you do is, we started here, and then you can kind of see maybe some of that juice starting to form.
Oh, yeah.
So if you want to put that cabbage,
Is that already salted?
this is already salted.
Okay,
yeah.
gotcha. So that's why
kinda
it's breaking
did
down and
yeah,
juicy.
so the
Gotcha.
salt helps to pull the moisture out of the cabbage.
Gotcha.
And then it kind of will firm up, so to speak, the cells of the cabbage, I believe. And that's what's preserving the cabbage. And then you're creating that brine with its own water that's within the cabbage. And then when we go to press it into the jar, you'll see that it creates quite a bit of liquid, and having that liquid kept above the vegetables is really the most important part. So I always tell folks everything's fine below the brine. So if you
Ah,
keep,
like
it's you want an anaerobic is what we're going for, no oxygen. So keeping that vegetable submerged below that brine will keep all the bad bacteria out and have the good do what it needs to do to preserve the cabbage.
Nice.
So, yeah, if you want to plot that in the bowl,
And right in here, just
Yep.
going to add to it, hey? Layer any salt or just all the cabbage in? And
you can just put all the cabbage in and then put in the tablespoon of salt. But when you're
Okay.
doing like the big, say 5-gallon, we would do it by layers. Maybe
Sure.
a head of cabbage,
little
tablespoon,
salt, little
yeah, and then as
cabbage.
you go.
And we're going to go with a tablespoon because of my excellent weighing abilities, right?
So one of the things you mentioned, Ashley, was a crock. And just for people who don't know what a crock is, would you mind sharing what that looks like and or how you would use it?
Yeah, I learned slightly, maybe the hard way. We thought it was like a literal crock that you plug in. When we first, so our first pickles were total mush. That did not work. You could maybe still use the base of it, the actual
Sure.
crock pot, but it's ideal if you go and find, and honestly, a lot of thrifts and secondhand shops have these crocks. You can go, of course, online, things like that, but I just actually found this one at a funny little antique shop in Calumet recently. So these are really nice to have for bigger batches. But to just start out, say you haven't tried it, you're not sure if you're going to like it, in a quart jar or even a pint jar is really a good way to start small and slow.
What will stop the fermentation process?
I don't think anything really stops it, but putting it in the fridge slows it way down.
Oh, okay,
So,
sure.
actually, if you wanted to start, basically what you do in this kind of small batch style is you can just use your hand and you just start like,
Massage it.
you just
Why don't I
kinda-
massage it?
like that, but like firmly.
Like
And
that,
aggressive.
Ashley?
Yeah, that's better. And then while that's, sometimes it can take a little bit of time for the kind of the natural liquid to be extracted. So say it's just feeling real dry, you can just set it aside for 15 minutes, go run do something else, come back, and that salt will have worked that liquid out. You can squeeze it for a while, and then maybe we'll let it sit for maybe 5 minutes, and then we'll
Sure.
come back and see how it's looking.
Sure. Okay.
And then salt is another thing. Ideally, it's a fine grind sea salt. I find that to be most helpful, especially when you're making a brine where you're actually using water and salt and pouring that over your ferment. With this one, the salt's going directly onto the cabbage for it to make its own brine, but a lot of times you're making a saltwater brine. So hopefully usually if it doesn't have anti-caking agents or iodine or any other sort of additives that some salts have. So I actually just go to the bulk department at the Keweenaw Co-op and get the fine grind Himalayan sea salt, and that works really great, and it's quite affordable, that type of salt.
Why would you be doing a pour over brine versus the way we're doing it?
So that would be when something doesn't necessarily make its own natural brine.
Gotcha.
For instance, the carrot and garlic that I like to do, coin carrots, coin your garlic, throw that in, and you're not really squishing anything, you're just kind of packing those vegetables in, or cucumbers, for instance. Then you pour over that saltwater brine, and that's what's going to start that fermentation process.
Gotcha.
Okay, so something like cabbage has enough water naturally in it that it's
Yeah,
gonna...
exactly. Same with turnips. Turnips create, I think it's called sour Reuben when it's done. So that's the same process. You take a turnip, cut it, or that's when it's nice to have a mandolin that has the little teeth on the plate. So you kind of julienne it. I think it's julienne.
You are correct.
And then you do the salt, and you do a light, not quite as rigorous as you would with the cabbage. Pack that in, it creates its own brine as well, and turnips, it turns into like a really, almost like a sharp flavor, a little spicy. It is divine. But yeah, I have a hard time growing turnips, so I don't get to make it that often. But yeah, we can do a few more squeezes.
Oh yeah, it's definitely getting softer.
So yeah, it can take kind of 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes, depending on how many breaks you want to take, or sometimes, I don't know if cabbage correlates to how dry the year is, because there's been some years where I've actually had to top it off with a little bit of salt water that I made, because I just couldn't quite get enough of its own natural liquid to form. So if that happens, that you don't quite get enough of your own brine, you can use a little bit of salt water to top it off.
Now, will it keep, as we pack the jar and it sits out, will it keep making liquid?
That's a great question, and actually it will. So
we'll keep an eye on it, right?
Yeah, with this, it's good too, and then you can feel how that's softening as well.
Oh, yeah.
Even within just a few minutes, it's crazy. But yeah, as it sits, I've had the problem where it will overflow. So it's good to really put your ferments on a baking sheet to keep messes, although I made a fermented thimbleberry hot sauce. I did not put it on a baking sheet. It, came out and our wood floor is stained red, but I'm like, whatever. So it's great to have it on a baking sheet. That keeps kind of the mess down. But yeah, so it will create more. But yeah, I guess if we want to try to start.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if your hand, I have a mini hand, so it fits.
Oh yeah, I gotcha, yeah.
It fits in the jar.
That's not going to work as well, is it?
So really, I like to really pack that in there. And I think if your hand doesn't fit, that's where it would be nice to have.
I've been dying to use this. Is it time?
You could maybe flip it around possibly.
Oh,
Something
yeah.
to tamp it down.
Well, I have something like this in a mini version that I use to make mojitos.
Oh, like a muddler.
A muddler.
Yeah.
Yeah, so a muddler would work, right?
Yep, that would work.
Okay.
And then another thing that we didn't talk about was making sure everything is sterile before you start. That's why I brought this to show. It's just a one-step kind of powder solution I use. You would just put like a teaspoon into your jar, fill that with water, let that sit for 30 seconds. Make sure your hands are nice and clean. Any sort of utensils you're using are clean. You could wear gloves, but it's certainly not necessary. It's as best as you can do. It does not have to be perfect. So yeah, pushing that in.
And is this to get the air out, or is it to get all the cabbage
It's
in?
basically, to get as much product in as you can, but it's also to keep, you do want to push as much oxygen out. Have as little sort of room for any kind of oxygen. But yeah, when you see if I push down, kind of that liquid starts to come
juicy.
up. So.
Sure.
So you talked a little bit, Ashley, about, you could basically let this ferment as long as you want. 3 days, couple weeks, depending on preferences on texture, flavor, those kinds of things. Are there any warning signs people should be aware of as they are letting it sit in the jar that things have gone wrong or like things are not
Yeah.
looking good?
Yeah, it's a lot harder for something to go wrong when you use a mason jar and this airlock lid, because that everything is contained. There's no open kind of source for oxygen or little bits of cabbage to poke up through that brine. It's all kind of contained, which is really nice. But where I've had trouble and actually had kraut go bad, to be honest, was in the crock method, because that is where there's just more space for, basically little bits of cabbage to like peek up and then catch a little bit of that bad yeast. I think it's called like a calm yeast. It's just a white layer, and usually if you see that, they do suggest scraping. So if you put it into the crock, usually I will sterilize a plate, something that fits just in it, and then put a sterilized rock on top to weigh that down, and that will help keep the cabbage under the brine, or laying these leaves over it and then putting a plate and a rock. You can also fill up a Ziploc bag with water to lay that down over it to keep it under the brine, because that's really the most important part. But yeah, you'll start to see bubbles in the crock and almost a little bit of foam. So they suggest just kind of going maybe once a day, checking it, kind of scraping that off, tossing that. But yeah, I think if you see, usually about maybe after, depends on how warm your house is too, because the warmer it is, the quicker the ferment will go. So I would suggest maybe after 5 days, you take the plate off. Again, make sure, clean hands, all that. Take the plate off. I usually will take that time to give that plate a rinse, kind of scrape any of that kind of little foam off, give it a try, and like, how does it taste to you? Is it starting to get soft? Is it starting to get to that funk level that you're looking for? But with kraut, I tend to want to pull it a little bit early into the fridge to slow that fermentation down, because my problem is that I will maybe forget, and it will get too soft, or too much cabbage has popped up over the brine because I'm just not checking it, and then actual mold will form. Even when that happens, I'm not that worried about that. I have just scraped that first layer off, because usually underneath that is fine. But once you see that, you know that it's kind of caught that sort of undesirable, I don't know what you would call it, undesirable funk. Yeah.
Undesirable funk versus desirable funk.
Exactly.
There's a difference.
There's a big difference. So yeah, you can really see that liquid starting to rise up.
Well, and you have so much in the bowl, too.
Yeah, there's a lot. So say you end up using all your cabbage, you could just pour that liquid over that to top it off too. Another thing to look for, I guess it's just the texture you're looking for and the flavor. And again, kind of putting it in that fridge to slow that fermentation way down. It may still be a little crunchier than you want it to be, but it will continue to ferment and soften in the fridge. And kraut for us has stayed probably for about, I actually have some in the from last November when we made kraut with my folks.
Oh, nice.
And it's still good, but it's definitely quite a bit softer. But had I put it in the fridge a little too soft, it it'll soften, and maybe it would still be fine, but texturally, I just don't care much for a really soft kraut. But if it does go that way and you don't care for the texture, that's where it might be good to cook it.
Yeah.
And still be able to use it.
Sure. Just heat it up. Bring it up to temp.
Throw, I love ribs and kraut, things like that. It's always good with potatoes.
Sure. And then we're using purple and green cabbage, and I know that you were maybe mentioning that one of them might be a little juicier than others.
Yeah, I think the red cabbage tends to be a little bit drier, and I'm not sure why. So it is nice to use both. So the green cabbage will have a little more moisture in it, although the whole thing, now you can see green bits. In a couple of days, it'll all turn purple.
I'll be purple.
So if you don't want a purple cabbage, just use green, and that's totally fine too. And I'm not sure if purple has added benefits.
So it does have some specific, what we call polyphenols. It's basically like plant powerhouse compounds.
Okay.
So the purple ones are particularly linked with like brain health, mood, those sorts of things. So that is an added perk.
That is, and yeah, so fermentation is also adding, taking what might be already in it and making it better. I was saying that the vitamin C content in cabbage increases through the fermentation process. And then it's also creating probiotics and other beneficial bacteria. And then to see how you react to it, you might just want to start with a couple of tablespoons instead of eating half a jar.
Right.
I mean, my situation can handle quite a bit of fermented food because I eat the funky stuff, all the time. And I can go a little risky, to be honest. Sometimes I'm like, it's on the cusp, but So, but just to see how it works with your health is, and how you feel, it is good to start with just maybe a little taste and see how you feel.
Nice.
Yeah, and one thing I'll say too is that for people, cabbage is one of those vegetables that raw can be hard for people to digest.
Oh.
So the fermentation process also helps break that down naturally as your gut is trying to work that down. So if you find that raw cabbage doesn't sit well with you, you might find something fermented like kraut actually sits a lot better.
Yeah, I didn't realize that with cabbage. That is the same with the sourdough bread.
Yep.
So that fermentation in the sourdough helps break down those glutens to be a little more readily digestible for folks that have trouble with the other types of bread. So now that this is pretty much at the top, sometimes this is what's nice about this lid. You can push this down, and then after you add a little more brine from the bowl, and that can keep the product underneath the brine. Then you have this lid with this airlock, and that is really convenient. You can just you don't have to worry about checking it every day. However, since this will make more liquid, sometimes that liquid does come up through the airlock as well. So I have had to take dump it, get fresh water in the airlock. So even though you have this setup, you still are going to want to keep an eyeball on it every few days.
And I think that you're not going to use this juice because you know that that's going to create more.
That's another thing. Like, the juice isn't quite above it right now, but if I press down just a little bit, it's there.
Sure.
So I do know for sure in a few days, because the one I made for you guys, I did make sure that the brine was above it, and I had to empty that airlock out like 4 or 5 times because it really made a lot of extra juice. Another thing you can do is if you have a ferment from a prior ferment, taking like a tablespoon of that liquid, say you did the carrot and garlic ferment, take a tablespoon of that, toss that in, or even an old batch of kraut, that's almost going to be like an activator to jumpstart your new ferment.
Okay.
And then too, you can take a little cabbage leaf and press that down in it to help
Seal it up.
keep
Yeah.
the product again under the brine. And then as you eat your kraut, I would also suggest as the volume goes down, say you get to half, put that in a smaller jar. And so to really keep that airspace as minimal as possible, because that's where the top layer, I think even in the fridge regardless, it's going to get a little softer, it's going to get maybe a little discolored because oxygen, it's just going to be there. So even sometimes maybe half a year down the road it's getting a little gray looking, I'll just skim that little bit off, compost it, and then everything is fine underneath that. But moving it to smaller jars and keeping the leaf, piece of parchment paper, that helps to sort of keep that oxygen off. You could also use a regular lid.
Oh yeah.
You just want to make sure that every day or twice a day, you take the lid off, let the kind of bubbles release, and then put it back on.
Would it be similar if you were to do a jar like this? You would want to be releasing opening the lid every couple.
Yep, just flip the lid
Okay.
open just for a few seconds, really, close it again, because it can create a lot of pressure and a lot of bubbles. I've had jars that I've forgotten to check, and the cap, it's domed. The most important thing is that your salt percentage is correct and that you keep the vegetables under the brine, but otherwise, you could leave it 3 days, you could leave it 2 weeks, you could add almost anything you want. This is so basic of a recipe, they can get pretty wild.
Peppers, onion.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you were to add flavors, would you suggest like a certain, let's say like garlic, something maybe lower key, but like a certain ratio, or would you start really small, like 1 clove and see how that goes?
Yeah, I guess if you know you like garlic, and I do. I could do about 2 heads in there. But yeah, you wouldn't. I think that would be something good.
Well, you brought some. Do you want to try some, Michael? Would you like to
Yeah.
eat some as well, Ashley?
I'll give it a whirl.
Okay.
I'm excited. Boom. Oh, there's the cabbage leaf on top.
Beautiful. So yeah, that color.
Now-
So yeah, you can see how that turned. It started like this, and it's turned into that color.
Yeah, sure. And now I'm guessing, this is for Michael, who is the king of putting the fork in jars and just eating out of them.
I do it too.
But I'm guessing
Technically,
it might introduce something
yeah,
that...
you want a clean fork, a one-time use. Although I don't. I'm like,
A clean fork, Megan, one-time use.
Okay. I'm a rule follower, so I will file that away.
but yeah, you can squirrel around that a little bit.
I'm trying to wait for you, Megan.
But yeah, it's great as a side dish.
Oh, here, we
just
can
something
share
to
if you
help.
want, love.
Oh, you want? Well, I'll give some to Ashley too.
Ashley and I'll
I'll
share.
take a
We're
bite.
over here.
Is it awful?
Oh, no, it's really crunchy.
I love the color on that too. I think adding the
That
purple
is really good. Are you happy with that?
That is good, and I like it crunchier.
Yeah, I like a crunchy too.
So for this one, how long did you let it ferment? Do you remember?
Well, again, my house is a cold one, and we are just not turning the heat on. We won't do it. So probably low 60s. Maybe that was 2 weeks. But if, say, your house is up in the 70s, as some folks have it, I mean, that could go in a week. So really, ideally, 4 or 5 days, give it a test. And that's the best way to know. It's just to try it as you go. And honestly, once you test it the one time, it can go quick. So you almost maybe every 2 days, give it a little taste. And then when you
Oh,
do
that's
finish,
good.
you want to kind of make sure you sort of pack it. Sometimes it comes up on the edges of the jar. You want to keep everything as flat as possible because just that little bit can kind of start to get a little funny, and it does affect the rest. So keeping everything as flat, putting that cabbage leaf back down, a little extra step, but it's going to preserve this even longer.
So I noticed immediately about that versus like the store kraut, is it because they pasteurize it and they cook it so it gets soft?
Yeah.
I like a kraut much more that's crunchy.
Yeah, I think because now I'm used to that, I still don't mind store kraut for sure. It definitely has its place when I'm cooking anyways, say my ribs and kraut.
Sure.
But yeah, because we haven't, it's going to maintain that crunch level. But again, if you like a softer kraut, you can let it sit. You just gotta be careful it doesn't get too soft, because even in a day or two, you can go from fantastic to like,
It's gone.
not
It's pig
feeling
food.
that. Yeah. If one were to raise pigs, we tried it.
Oh.
Well, I don't know. Is there any other questions you have? I think you've done a great job actually covering everything. I feel much
Thanks.
more confident. For me, I don't know about you, Michael, but fermenting is always something that sounds so fun, but it scares me. And so I think
Sure.
you did a really good job at showing us it doesn't have to be scary.
No, I mean it's quite simple. There's a lot of great resources and books. All those authors are online. They all put recipes and how-tos on their Instagram, their Facebook. I follow a lot of fermenters that way, and that's a great way to get new ideas. And really the worst is that you don't like the taste and you toss it and then you just try something else. So I always encourage people to get started. It's not scary. It's not hard. I mean, this really could take you 10 minutes. It doesn't have to take that long at all. A lot quicker than other things. Canning, that takes some time. This is much quicker. So
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks,
you're welcome.
Ashley.
Thanks for having me out.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode.
If you'd like to watch other episodes, feel free to go to pldl.org/biblio-bistro, and you'll find all of our previous episodes, show notes, and recipe cards right there for you. Until next time,
Bon appetit!